You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
Hey guys, welcome back. You're listening to the second part of last week's episode. Let's jump back in.
Okay, so let's talk about why foreclosures now, right? So we are in the middle of I always say I don't want to, there's a danger when you're on a podcast like this, right? If I'm hosting a podcast, I can say things that make me sound like more of an expert than I am, right? So I always want to say I'm not an economic expert. I will say that my layman's opinion, working with investors every day, is that as of right now, as we're recording this, we are in the middle of what feels like a market correction. And who knows, we may go all the way down into the deep, dark depths, right? Or it may not be a big deal. But I think it's fair to say that most investors feel that the market now is a much harder market than we were dealing with a year ago or a year before that. Okay. So in that kind of situation, you have sort of made these inroads into foreclosures and really kind of use this. We all going all the way back to in 2008, where you first were kind of pivoting and everything. So if an investor comes to you and says, hey, I know I need to do something different with my investing business. I've been doing motivated seller type stuff, fix and flips, buy and holds, whatever it is. I'm interested in foreclosures, adding that to my kind of lead pipeline, but I'm not convinced. What would you say to them? What are the benefits of doing what you do in a market like the one that we're in today?
So first thing I'll say is there's always foreclosures. It doesn't matter how good or bad the housing market is or the economy. There will always be foreclosures because there are always unfortunate situations and circumstances where somebody is having a hard time. They either lost their job or their spouse lost their job, or there's some big medical expense that came up that they had to pay for, or they're going through a divorce. Life happens. And I have been buying pre-foreclosures and trustee sales for 20 years, and I've done it in good markets and bad. I mean, I usually kind of pivot in and out of pre-foreclosures and or sheriff sales or trustee sales, just depending upon what's going on in the market. But there are opportunities in both acquisition strategies, both ways to acquire properties doing that. I mean, I've been buying sheriff sale properties for the last 6 years, in 5-6 years in Wisconsin, and not so much here in Arizona, but been doing pre-foreclosures here now in Phoenix for 20 years. I mean, I obviously when the housing market crashed and people were underwater from 2009 to 2012, 13, you couldn't do it. But as soon as we started, the economy started to turn around, it was a great acquisition strategy once again. So I will say this, I don't feel personally like after living through a housing market crash, I don't feel like we're going to see another housing market crash. I mean, some say we were in a recession now. And some say if we're not, we're going to be in 2023. Recessions always create, whether it's a housing market crash, well, there's a big difference between a housing market crash and a job loss recession, right, which is what I think most people agree is happening. It's a job loss recession, not a housing market crash. But there's really, I think, 4 reasons why we won't see a crash. And that's because 2007, 2008, there was stated income liar loans. So there was very loose underwriting criteria. That has not been the case the last decade.
Yeah.
Number 2, we had, zero, no money down type loans, right? So people could, so then no one had any skin in the game. Number 3, they were adjustable rate mortgages, interest only mortgages. So people weren't paying down any principal prior to the housing market crash. And then lastly, mostly the housing market then was dominated by investor buyers who were either buying homes to rent out or speculate, banking on appreciation. And most of our buyers the last 10 years have been owner occupants. So, you compare the circumstances back then to now, Most people have equity. Most people have locked in principal, interest, taxes, insurance payments at very low rates. So, I mean, I don't think there's any way for the market to trend but downward right now because of high interest rates. That's the only reason. If the Fed decided to just back down rates into the fives, I think you'd start to see how prices go back up again and we'd have a shortage of inventory, which we still have right now. So
Yeah.
but anyway, all that said, I still think regardless of what's going on in the economy, the pre-foreclosure and or auction strategy is my favorite. And it's predominantly how I've been able to acquire houses that I've been fixing and flipping for the last 20 years and or acquire as rentals. And the reason I like it so much is because I know without beyond a shadow of a doubt, I know when I talk to somebody who's in foreclosure, they're motivated. Whereas if I'm using a strategy of, text blasting people or direct mailing, it's just like you're casting this wide net and you're getting all these fish and, dolphins and all these different species that stuck in your net that you're
not supposed to get the dolphins, by the way. I think that's
exactly right.
Yeah,
So you're getting all this, stuff you don't want. And when I get on the phone with somebody, I want to know they are motivated. They have to sell. So, and there may not be as many, but that's great, right? I mean, like I talk to people who are doing text message blasts and they're getting hundreds of leads, a week, a month, and they're just sifting and they're hiring VAs and they're sifting through all this stuff.
Yeah.
And they're getting people on the phone who want full market value or more for their house because they're just hoping you're the guy on the other end who's a sucker and will just, give you more than what your home's worth. And I don't want to deal with those kind of people. I'd rather talk to one or two highly motivated sellers a month who have real equity in their homes. Like I'm working with somebody right now in Casa Grande, which is about an hour from Phoenix. This guy's house is going to auction in a week. And I was able to get a hold of him and, because most people give up. People who are marketing to homeowners in foreclosure, when it gets a week or two away from the sale, they just give up because they don't know how to put a deal together. They don't know how to stop the foreclosure. They don't know how to, make it all right so they can get the house before it sells at auction. And that's where I come in, right? When it's 2 weeks or less, that's the opportune time. And there aren't a lot of people that get to that point, but the ones that do, there's not very many people who know how to help them like I do. So, a guy owes 75, he owes 75 grand on his house. It's worth 250, right? So there's a huge margin there and no one's going to talk to him because they can't help him. There's not enough time. Actually, the sale's next Tuesday. So, I know this is recorded. So basically I have a week to put the deal together. So,
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're listening to this, by the time you're listening to this deal is over. So don't go looking for this deal that is mentioning. But yeah, so, okay. You just said something that I find really interesting, right? Which I never really thought about, which is the time limit element to foreclosures, which you're exactly right. There is literally a deadline. Unlike everybody else who is just kind of maybe interested in what their house might go for in some form or another. Now you mentioned that like your skill set, and I think this is one of the things that makes you clearly like really good at what you do, is your ability to handle these deals and are coming very close to the wire. And I know you talk about this stuff in the book, which again, if people want to go check it out, you can get this book at foreclosuresecrets.net. You can go check this out. You only have to pay shipping and handling, so you can go check that out right now. But if you were going to give people some advice, if they're saying like, look, I'm interested in foreclosure deals or pre-foreclosures, but I keep running into this issue where I'm hitting the time limit and I can't figure out how to make things work. What are some tips for people to kind of better navigate that space so they can actually get the deal under contract without it kind of just going straight into auction, like you said?
So, I mean, obviously you've got to at least have some rapport with the owner of the house because there's a process you have to go through to buy it. And even, I closed a deal. I close deals all the time where, we're literally hours away from the auction taking place. So really the process is, number one, you have to have a seller who's willing to sign a contract to sell the house to you. And then the second step is, and this is a big one, as you need them to sign a loan authorization form, which gives you permission to call their bank so you can get what you need from the bank to stop the auction. By the way, if you go to foreclosuresecrets.net and you buy my book, I give that form away for free as well as the contract I use. So you need those two things. And if you get my book, you get those two things for free as part of some of the bonus content in the book. So then the next step is you've got a signed contract with the seller of the property, and you've got a loan authorization form, which gives you permission to contact the bank. Then you've got to get the bank to let you know as soon as possible, one of two things or both. You want to know how much it's going to take to bring the loan current, which is called a reinstatement figure, or the payoff on the mortgage so you can pay off the loan. Because the only way to stop the foreclosure is to bring the loan current or to pay the loan off. I'd much rather just reinstate the loan and bring it current. Then what I can do is I can just do a subject to deal with the seller in foreclosure, which is my favorite strategy of all time. I call it the pre-foreclosure plus subject to strategy. So all you have to do at that point, once you have that reinstatement figure, is send the lender the money that is owed to them to bring the mortgage current. Boom, the auction is stopped. You have the now, again, you got to get the order right. You get the contract signed by the seller of the house. You get the loan authorization form. Once you know how much you have to send the bank to bring the loan current, okay, then you can meet the seller again. And this is, again, a kitchen table of closing. You meet them at their house with a mobile notary, or you meet them at a bank where there's a notary, and you get them to sign the deed of the house over to you or your LLC. And any other forms that your state may require be recorded as well to officially convey title from that seller to you. And then the next step is hopefully you promised the seller some money. They're not going to want to do this unless you promised them some money right there. So If you're at your bank, you give them a cashier's check for $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is. Then you hustle on down to your county recorder's office or your county, record the deed. So now you're the owner of it, right? So you got the title of the property, you own it. Then you wire the bank their money, and as soon as they get that reinstatement figure, and when they give you that reinstatement figure, they're going to tell you where to wire it to. They're going to give you a reference number, and you'll get a receipt. So boom, that's when officially the foreclosure stops. And if you can put all that together, sometimes I've done it in a matter of hours. I tell the story in the book. On the morning, my daughter just turned 18. The morning she was born at 6:30 in the morning. By 2, I got a call that morning from a seller who was in foreclosure. And I got in the postpartum room on the phone with the bank while my wife was there holding my little newborn baby. I got the reinstatement figure. Then I went and met with the seller and got a mobile notary to sign the deed. And I went straight to the county recorder's office, recorded the deed. Then I went to the bank and got a cashier's check. And actually, in this particular case, I had to go to the courthouse steps and give the reinstatement figure to the auctioneer. And then he looked at the check, verified it was certified. He called the lender and they canceled the sale. And it was funny. That was really fun because I show up with the check and there's all these other guys there to bid on the house, right? They want to buy it. And they're like, they're asking me, what's the TS number, which is the trustee sale number. And I tell them, and they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, we're bringing the loan current. They're like, oh, come on, man. So ruined their day. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, and also I just had a baby girl. You're pass out cigars or whatever.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I didn't think about that. I should have done that.
I mean, that's just amazing, man. So again, and all that information is absolutely amazing, right? So again, if you guys want to get more of Marty's book here, it's a foreclosuresecrets.net. And you can go check that out. Like you said, it's $10, get the entire thing. I think even just the forms and the sort of contracts and stuff that you have in there alone make it worthwhile. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to take you back to 2008, which I'm sure is something you love to do in your head all the time. But you mentioned you had this sort of real estate portfolio, $16 million on paper, went to negative $2 million. And I'm curious about that experience. I think for people, there are a lot of investors right now who have never really invested through the type of market we saw in 2008, right? They weren't in business then. they were too young, whatever it was. And I think we're, whether it's political stuff or it's COVID or it's the housing market, there's a lot of uncertainty in the air. And I think a lot of people are wondering, if things get really bad, am I going to be one of the ones that figures out a way to make it through and pivot and do all this stuff, the stuff that I need to do to keep my business afloat, right? So can you take us back to that period in your life? You've got this negative net worth now. What was it like for you sort of emotionally? What was going through your head? And then how did you figure out what to do from then on? How did you start the process of rebuild?
So I had a mentor at that time. And not at that time. He went through exactly the same thing I did. He was my mentor post housing market crash, right? And him and I would get together. I think I lost, 2 million, basically ended up losing about 2 million. I was underwater by 2 million and he was underwater by like 20 million. So wow. I was like, well, I feel better. You're 10 times worse.
Right. Just relatively, it's not so bad. Yeah.
But I mean, and he would say, we didn't do anything wrong. They changed the rules, right? I mean, they changed the rules on us. And that's essentially what's going on now. I mean, the Federal Reserve just decided on their own, the best way to curb inflation is to more than double interest rates in 6 months. That's all. I mean, if they would have even I feel like incrementally increased rates up to where we're at now over, say, 24 months, I think would be okay. Like we wouldn't have people kind of, screaming the sky is falling, right? It would be, hey, you know what? And even if they only raise rates to 5.5, I'd still think you'd see a very healthy, appreciating housing market versus prices dropping. Here in Phoenix, I think since rates initially climbed, I mean, we're down 10, 15%. So yeah, I mean, I think it's created all of this, and it was back then and it is now created by external forces, right? The rules change. And then as investors and really just as primary homeowners, these rules change and it drastically affects our net worth. It affects, just the, everything, our financial statements, all of those things. So, but I will say this, the lesson I learned coming out of the crash was, and my mentor taught me this too. It's like, if you can avoid being in a situation where these assets are negative cash flowing, it doesn't really matter. And this is more if you're kind of on the buy and hold side.
Right.
But like I owned 65 houses and only maybe 10 out of the 65 were actually cash flowing. The rest were break even or losing money every month because at that point I didn't really care because the market was appreciating, it was going up. I'm like, I can afford to lose $100 here, $200 here, $300 here. But when values plummet, and so what I would have to do, Dan, is in order to, with 65 of these things, what I'd have to do is I'd have to sell one off every other month, right? Just to cover the negative cash flow. But I didn't care because I had so many of them and they were going up in value. But when the housing market crashed, the values dropped, overall in Phoenix by 55%. So I couldn't sell them anymore, cover the negative cash flow. And it got to a point where I couldn't sell them anymore and even make a profit. Every time I sold one, I lost $20,000 or $50,000. So it was just a horrible business model based almost solely on appreciation, right? So, and it's funny because I read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he talks about how stupid that is to do it. And I did it anyway, just because, I felt like, I was in an appreciating market. So if I had assets I could sell, kind of buy and sell to cover it, who cares, right? Well, it was just kind of the perfect storm. So,
right.
In today's housing market, I mean, if you were careful and you're being disciplined and you were buying only assets that cash flowed, it doesn't matter. Like I've got a nice portfolio of rentals in Wisconsin, and the least net cash flow producing property I have, the lowest cash flow producing property I have is like $547 a month. So, and the house at the peak of the market and house values haven't really decreased there like they have here. It's a much smaller percentage, but I mean, maybe at the time I bought it or at the peak, I could have sold it for 190. Now it's maybe 178, 180, but I would never sell it because it's generating almost $600 a month. It's a little 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath house in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm like, so there's really never a wrong time to buy real estate, only a wrong way. I had another mentor say that to me once. So cash flow is where it's at. I mean, and I tell people all the time, when the housing market, prior to the housing market crash, I had considered selling. If I would have sold I could have sold about 90% of my real estate portfolio, had enough cash. Now, this is when the market was before the market crashed. And this is what I should have done. And I think about this all the time, still to this day. If I'd have sold 80, 90% of the portfolio, I'd have had enough cash to pay off 10 or 12 of my rentals, own them free and clear. And each one of them was renting between $1,200 and $1,500 a month. So that alone would have generated about $18,000 a month in cash flow. No debt, right? I'd have had enough money to pay off the mortgage on my personal residence. I had a second home in Flagstaff, could have paid that off. Could have paid off my $100,000 Mercedes, and my truck and my boat. And you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I'd just be, just going, hey, I got 18 grand a month coming in and zero debt, right? It wouldn't have mattered that the value of that real estate portfolio would drop by 55% because it was still generating $18,000 a month in cash flow.
Right.
So all I would say to people today, well, first of all, I'm not nearly as worried about a housing market crash. I do think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. There's going to be more foreclosures, pre-foreclosures, auction properties, because when people lose their jobs, that's a disruptive cash flow event.
Yeah.
And if you Google that, the number one disruptive event is job loss. And there's going to be job loss. I have friends in the tech industry who work here in Phoenix, and high up friends, and they're having to lay people off. It's sad. I mean, so there's going to be a lot of that. So there's going to be opportunity, a lot more opportunity than there was. But, you're talking about, say, like with my favorite foreclosure subject to strategy, you got someone in foreclosure and you can take their loan subject to, and the interest rate's 3-4%, you can't lose. And even if you were putting a deal together with somebody who had no equity, right? I mean, houses in my area where I live, I mean, if somebody was in foreclosure and they had zero equity, I'd give them 5-10 grand just to take their loan subject to, because their mortgage, their payment is so low. I could buy it and rent it out, cash flow it, or I could Airbnb it, VRBO it, whatever, right? Because they're locked in. It's such a low rate. I mean, it's crazy. So to me, it's a great time to use, the pre-foreclosure strategy for acquisition, whether it's an acquisition strategy you want for fix and flips or buy and holds, or wholesale, right? But I think your initial question was, how do you juxtapose the, easy for me to say, how do you compare? I'll just use an easier word, compare that to what we're going through today. And I think the only risk, the big risk for real estate investors, for example, my primary source of revenue is fix and flip. And you just got to be really cautious and forecast out a decline, right? You want to forecast out, look at what's going on in your market, what's selling today versus what was selling 6 months ago. And you figure out, okay, what's the difference? Is it 10, 15% difference, like lower? Because somebody who could buy the same house in February, now you figure it's the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023, middle of 2023. It's like, what were houses selling for when rates were at 3% versus when rates were at 7%? And you don't use those comps on houses that sold in the 3% range. Look at comps for houses that sold in the 7% range, and those are your values. That's your ARV. And then maybe you take a 5% off that just for a little more decline, and then you factor in, instead of, like, I was factoring in on some of my fix and flips, like 90 days of holding time, because I could get it, if I could get the house done in 60 days and rehabbed, I knew it's gone in 30 days. And the day I put it on the market is the day it goes under contract, right?
Yeah.
So instead of 90 days of holding costs, now it's at least 6 months, right? Maybe 8 months. But you can plug those numbers in and use those numbers. And I still think you're going to be okay. You're not going to lose money if you're fixing and flipping. But it's the same thing with a wholesaler. If you're wholesaling these things, just know that if I'm buying it from you, you're wholesaling it to me. I got to factor in, I'm not going to use your stupid comps that you send me from 6 months ago, because that's when rates were at 3. I need comps from when rates were at 7% or whatever the case is. So, and I'm going to factor in longer holding costs. So if you're a wholesaler, you better figure out that fix and flip investor is thinking worst case scenario. And I talk to wholesalers all the time, and that's what they're doing. They're like, we can't move stuff. I'm like, well, yeah, because when you bought the deal you made with the seller,
Right.
the numbers you used were back in the good old days.
Yeah. I have heard more than a few clients complaining about wholesalers who are trying to sell a deal for more than the house is worth. And it's like,
yeah,
you're the middle, you know what I mean? Like you're the one in the middle. Where's the spread there? Man. So dude, there's been so much good information here. We have talked about the book. The book is called Foreclosure Secrets. You can get it at foreclosuresecrets.net. Where else do you want people to look you up or learn more about you? Do you do social media? What should people do if they're interested in learning more about you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's instagram.com/fixandfliphub. So, and Fix and Flip Hub is my coaching company. And I started in 2016. And that's where I teach and coach people how to fix and flip houses, how to scale a fix and flip business. And so that's my Instagram handle. I wasn't going to create a new one for the book. Yeah. But what happened is I realized after starting my fix and flip coaching business in 2016 that you have to have a solid acquisition strategy to, buy houses and have enough margin in them to fix and flip them. Sure. And I started reflecting, actually it was about summer of 2021. I started thinking about, I don't have a real training program or a manual, if you will, or a kind of step-by-step on how I acquire my fix and flips. And it's always been foreclosures. I mean, I'd say 90% of every house I've ever fixed and flipped or kept as a rental was a foreclosure, either a pre-foreclosure, an auction deal, or an REO. And I'm just like, I don't have any real training or information that I share with people. I mean, when they get into my fix and flip program, I will take them through that process, because I do group coaching calls every week. And so, but I didn't really have anything specific, with a kind of a nuts and bolts A to Z. So I'm like, I got to write this book, because I've got all these crazy stories and these different things that happened to me over the years and, precautionary tales, if you will. So I'm like, I got to write this book. So anyway, Instagram.com/fixandfliphub. I talk about anything related to real estate investing, buy and hold, fix and flips, but mostly now about foreclosures. So you can get, and I'm doing more stuff on there now, now that I've, finished the book and can focus on it, just, the reels. And, I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/fixandfliphub. So
all right, thing. So Fix and Flip Hub on Instagram and YouTube. We'll have links to that, obviously, at adwordsnerds.com/podcast, where you can find this episode and all our past episodes. But Foreclosure Secrets is the book. You can get it for free. You just pay for the shipping. It's foreclosuresecrets.net. Go and check it out. Marty Boardman, thank you so much, man. This has been a super deep dive on something I honestly didn't know a ton about. And I really want to thank you, man. This has been really, really useful.
My pleasure. I appreciate you having me.
That is it. That's this week's episode of the REI Marketing Nerds podcast. Look, if you listen to this show, it would mean a lot to me if you could leave us a review wherever you get this podcast. Just takes a minute, but it really, really helps other people find the show. I read every single review and I take all feedback very seriously. So if you could leave us a review, I'd really appreciate it. As always, I appreciate you listening. It really means a lot. I will see you next week. Cheers.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.